To illustrate how the partnership works, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, James McGeechy. He'll explain how some of the programs we're working on fit together and help the UK business.
Hi, I'm James McGeechy. I'm the Technical and Programme Director here at LowCVP, and I'm here basically to take you through a few of example case studies to really show the sort of activities that we get involved in here at the partnership. First one we'd like to consider is passenger light vehicles. So by these I mean the smaller vehicles that are not necessarily big trucks, not necessarily cargo bikes, but somewhere sat in between. And we've currently got a project on the go at the moment looking at the potential for that category and classification of vehicle as an urban light goods delivery vehicle. Obviously there's a great deal of potential there for significantly lower emissions in terms of greenhouse gas, local air quality benefits, also very compatible with clean air zones for similar reasons. And in a post-COVID world, with a drive towards more active travel, there's also reallocation of road space in city centres as a consideration that might make powered light vehicles something that's certainly more suitable in the future. And that's along with reduced traffic congestion as well. And there's also a consideration that the UK industry is actually quite well placed to manufacture and design such vehicles, being of low volume, very lightweight structures, and innovative technologies associated with that. And something also that we've looked at within LowCVP, and this is typical of, is it's potentially an underdeveloped sector, where commercially perhaps it doesn't quite work at this stage, but given the benefits, particularly in terms of environmental aspects, it could be stimulated to provide a nice low carbon solution. So the project itself, initially it's trying to understand, is there an aspect in the market that warrants perhaps a new classification of vehicle? So we've mentioned the cargo bikes, and some of those are electric assist, and we've also mentioned vans, which are the traditional delivery methods. But here there could be something that's a kind of in-between choice, perhaps something a little lower cost, cheaper to make, smaller size, more nimble around city centres, and also cheaper to operate with a lower environmental footprint. So what are we doing? Well, as an example of the sort of process that we follow, we're reviewing the existing market. We're keen to understand whether our intuition around this is actually correct, and whether there is actually a segment here that's worth further exploring. And that also extends to determine if a gap exists for this type of vehicle. So is there something already there in the market that warrants use, promotion, or if it doesn't exist, then perhaps it should be created and promoted in that way. We create a high-level vehicle specification once we've got some confidence that that segment is worthy of investigation, and then we actually engage with our membership, and in this instance particularly the operators, because after all we can determine a gap exists, we can write a specification, but if it's not something that the operators and the community want to use, then again that's something that really shouldn't be taken any further. So it's looking at the whole aspect. And having identified that there is a demand, our next stage for this project would be to identify the barriers. So if the demand is there, and if the vehicle type is the right one to serve that demand, then why does it not exist at its current time? And in understanding those barriers, that's where again as LowCVP, we can then look to see how do we overcome those challenges and what recommendations should be made to move forward. And if we were to look at our typical partnership model, which we show on the slides, there's a number of areas around that we deal with, and in this instance we're involved in a number of different areas, from government through to vehicle manufacturers through to technology providers. So again it's reinforcing that this is something that is done as a partnership, not in isolation. The next project I'd like to discuss is life cycle analysis. Around passenger vehicles in this instance as an example. So you may be asking yourself, what is life cycle analysis? Well here, particularly of note at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around zero emissions, and that tends to mean zero tailpipe emissions. So the particulates, the emissions, the CO2 that comes out of the tailpipe of the vehicle. However, there are other aspects associated with with the vehicle manufacturer, with how the energy is created that goes into that manufacture, and indeed the end of life associated with disposal of that vehicle. And all of that chain, in fact the life cycle, has carbon associated with it and emissions and greenhouse gas associated with it. So we use LCA, or life cycle analysis, as a high-level directional tool. I emphasise that because we are not LCA experts, but what we do is use it to influence some of the decision making and some of the directions that we recommend. And principally we focus on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with vehicle production. It's part of a wider sustainability consideration, and it's around that no regrets decision making aspect. Now with any tool, assumptions are the key. Depending on what you put into a tool, very much dictates the output that you get. And again, as part of this, we're as user of LCA, we're also keen to drive for a harmonised standard and approach, so that when other organisations do LCA, that you can compare the results independently. So, okay, what does that look like? I've chosen here a traction battery example. So traction batteries are going to feature quite heavily, certainly in battery electric vehicles. And it's as you can see from the display, traction battery manufacture is actually quite carbon intense in terms of its manufacturing. We would say it carries with it quite a lot of carbon, embedded carbon, and that means a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with its actual manufacture, which is perhaps a little bit different to the traditional petrol and diesel vehicles, where a good proportion of the emissions comes from the vehicle use. And here I've drawn on this example as a battery electric vehicle, good zero tailpipe emission solution in terms of its use, particularly if it's associated with low carbon and renewable energy sources for the electricity grid. However, if we were to look at where it's manufactured, within that embedded carbon aspect, we can see that there's a difference between manufacture in Europe at this point in time and manufacture in the UK, and that difference can be worth up to 10% of the lifetime CO2 emissions associated with the vehicle. Without LCA, that's not immediately apparent, and this is where we use it as an example of the direction associated with our recommendations. So it gives you a wider picture and informs those no regrets. Again, looking at the partnership model, we draw on not just ourselves, but the rest of the partnership. And in this instance, again, we're looking at government and environmental aspects, the OEMs, and several other partners associated with that. So it's coming back to partnership again. As a third example, low emission freight trial. The left program, this is actually a test program, if you like, and a trial program. £20 million, 3 years, government program, so it's quite substantial. All of the names that you can see on the left of the slide are just a snapshot. They're not everybody that was involved, there are indeed many more. So you can see it's quite an expansive trial. And really this was focused on demonstrating new technologies and encouraging the introduction of low and zero emission vehicle into UK truck fleets, for want of a better word. So in terms of technologies, very varied, lightweight trailers, kinetic energy recovery systems, dual fuel, whether that be hydrogen and diesel, or gas and diesel, or gas on its own, range extender trucks using fossil fuel engines, or battery electric vehicles on their own. So again, quite an expansive list of technologies that are involved. In terms of LowCVP's involvement, there are several elements. We use of the LowCVP test cycles, for which LowCVP is quite well established and quite well known in terms of the emissions testing. So it's worth pointing out these trials were both in-service trials, so real fleet operators using the trucks out in real-world conditions, and also in emissions dynos and labs, so that for true correlation and comparison in terms of the effectiveness of the technologies that were fitted to the vehicles. We also helped develop the well-to-wheel emission factors to understand the cumulative greenhouse gas impacts associated with that, and also provided any support and guidance as required for the test partners. We then collated the results, whether that's in-service monitoring, the emissions testing, correlated the data and analysis from our consortia partners, and also, equally as important, the impressions of the technology from those users. So if you like, verbatim interviews, etc., as to how they found using the technology, which is equally important for adoption of the various different technologies themselves. And then we're responsible for dissemination of the program output. So conveying the results and the key learning points to the wider industry in the forms of program summary report and dissemination webinars. And again, coming back to our partnership model, you can see that involved many different partners again, and in this instance also fuels, which we haven't seen previously in some of the other examples. And it's a key aspect about the partnership and dissemination. Again, we're keen to essentially inform as many people as much as possible. We're not sort of protective over any of the work and results that we do. Members sometimes have preferential access and early access, but again, ultimately, we're looking to put this all into the public domain. And then finally, I'll conclude with the last example of the low carbon bus policy. Single slide for this one, simply because it's so expansive. We've been involved in the low carbon bus policy for what is getting on for about 20 years. And it's a £200 million of investment has gone through the years in terms of different bus schemes, as the years have progressed, going from a low emission to an ultra low emission and a variety of different programs in between, which is LowCVP has been involved in, influencing recommendations, and indeed reporting some of the outputs associated with that. And again, that aspect of partnership, because this is all encompassing, if we put the if you like, the partnership model up on this one, it would pretty much tick every box. And also you can see that it's over a pretty lengthy period of time. So in effect, we're kind of here to stay. We've got quite a lot of longevity. So as the peaks and troughs of UK industry, government and general world, we're a fairly consistent theme throughout. And also underlying that sharing and communicating the information as widely as possible.